According to Ian Gillan, in the early days of Deep Purple, he was so poor that he had to share one set of clothes with Roger Glover. He didn't even own a pair of shoes. He and Roger were starving. Sometimes they didn't even have money for food. So Gillan had to steal dog biscuits to get through the day. And when he went to the band's manager, John Coletta, who managed Deep Purple from 1968 until 1976, to ask for some money to buy clothes, Coletta brutally said, "I knew you were trouble the moment I set eyes on you. If you ask me for money one more time, I'll throw you back in the gutter where I found you." Gillan was shocked. He felt like he was being dipped in crap. Those words remained etched into the back of his skull for decades. "I had never heard anything so horrible in my life," Gillan says. "If you can ride through crap like that and come out the other side, you can cope with most things." Ian Gillan actually had a poor childhood. His father was a storekeeper at a factory in West London. Ian grew up moving from one council flat to another, and they ended up in a 3-bedroom semi-detached on a council estate in Cranford. In those days, there was rationing and his family had to be thrifty. His dad put £5 on the mantelpiece for the weekly shop, and on Saturday mornings, they took that to the butcher. They would hand over their coupons and get a lump of meat that had to last the rest of the week. Life was harder back then, Gillan says. In the very early days of his career, you'd get £5 for a gig, and that had to be split 5 ways with something put aside for petrol. So there was never very much left, Gillan recalls. So, according to Ian Gillan, he was very poor in Deep Purple. However, that was the case only in the early days of Deep Purple. After the breakthrough of Deep Purple in rock, and then the massive success of the 1972 album Machine Head, the band started making lots of money. "We had a lot of money back in 1972, but it didn't keep us happy," Roger Glover recalls. However, Ian Gillan says he did not see a penny until he filed a lawsuit. "It took a lot of lawsuits to see a penny," Gillan says, and eventually the band's accountant went to jail, but it was common in those days. "I tend to have just enough for next week. I call the office each morning and say, 'Can I afford this?' Generally, the answer is no." When finally Gillan started getting money, the first big thing he bought was a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud second-hand for £2,750, about $6,800 in 1973, about $50,000 today. He explained, "I was young and I thought I was immortal, and everything I wanted, I must have." My manager said at the time that a Rolls Royce probably cost a quarter of a house. He was right. My first house cost me about £12,000, $30,000 in those days. In 1973, Ian Gillan quit Deep Purple and the music industry to become a businessman. He invested his Deep Purple money in 3 diverse ventures: a London recording studio, Kingsway Recorders, formerly Delane Lee Studios, where many Purple classics have been recorded, a hotel in North Stoke, Oxfordshire, and a motorcycle engine manufacturing firm. Gillan says, "After I left Deep Purple, I didn't get paid in 10 years. In the early 70s, I bought a dilapidated hotel in North Stoke for about £100,000 and spent the same amount again renovating it, putting in a guitar-shaped swimming pool, painting the bathrooms purple, and installing gold dolphin taps. But I had also spent £150,000 starting up a motorcycle team as well, which failed as a business venture because it didn't get enough sponsorship. I had a cash flow crisis and had to close the hotel and sell it at a loss. I never have done well from business. I should have kept to music, but more about that later." In spring 1974, Ian Gillan began to work on a diverse set of songs with session musicians at his recording studio, but Purple's old management team wasn't interested. Eventually, Gillan's guest appearance at Roger Glover's Butterfly Ball live show at the Royal Albert Hall, London, on the 16th of October 1975 prompted him to resume a singing career and form a new band. Initially, Ronnie James Dio was supposed to sing it, but Ritchie Blackmore banned him to take part in it. So, Ian formed a new band initially called Shand Grenade. But the management insisted to change the band's name to the Ian Gillan Band for obvious name recognition. The musicians in the band played a jazzy, funky stuff which didn't appeal to either the audience or Gillan himself. And when the keyboardist Colin Towns came up with a song called Fighting Man, Ian loved it. In 1978, he left his own band and formed a new band with Colin Towns called simply Gillan. The Ian Gillan Band's bassist, John Gustafson, commented, "Gillan decided he didn't like the band's direction and wanted to do more rock stuff. In reality, he should have put his foot down a lot earlier. I personally was expecting Deep Purple stuff, but he let us do whatever we wanted." Originally, Steve Bird was on guitar, Liam Janocki on drums, and John McCoy on bass. The band pursued a progressive rock direction, releasing their debut album in September 1978. Although they could get a record deal only in Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, the album was released in Japan in autumn 1978. Before a new album was recorded, Bird was replaced by Bernie Torme and Pete Barnacle by drummer Mick Underwood, Ian Gillan's former colleague, in episode 6. Mr. Universe did well for a week, says Gillan. We went through a list of record companies from A to Z, but we couldn't get a record deal. Stiff Records told us to get off, and about 6 or 7 other labels said the same thing. We had 28 shows in Britain sold out, and no one wanted to know. We couldn't get a deal. In the end, we went back to A again and signed with a tiny company called Acrobat. Released in October 1979, Mr. Universe reached number 11 in the UK albums charts, and then Acrobat went bankrupt. So, Mr. Universe disappeared from the charts, says Gillan. But after that, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. We decided to sign with Virgin because they'd been back on us straight away. They were hot. I liked their attitude, and it worked out great. We had some super years with Virgin. Glory Road 1980 reached number 3 in the UK albums charts. Future Shock 1981 went number 2 in the UK album chart. And we had Double Trouble also 1981, which was a combination of a live album recorded at the Reading Festival and a studio album. And then we had Magic 1982. The album Magic actually failed to achieve the chart success of Glory Road or Future Shock, peaking at number 17 on the UK album chart. In 1980, Gillan reached the peak of their success, releasing the album Glory Road. However, the band remained unknown in the US and were unable to raise any interest there despite a long and difficult 1980 US tour. By 1981, the band members became disgruntled that their European and Japanese success was not translating into increased financial rewards. And after the Future Shock album, whilst on tour in Germany, guitarist Bernie Torme left the band just before they had to fly back to the UK to appear on Top of the Pops. Meanwhile, Ritchie Blackmore's band Rainbow wasn't commercially successful either. Rainbow had a solid fan base, Ritchie Blackmore's fans who knew him from Deep Purple. But that wasn't enough for Blackmore. He wanted the band to become really popular. He asked Ronnie Dio to write some commercial songs, but Ronnie did nothing. So Blackmore fired Ronnie, and he asked Ian Gillan to join the band at the end of 1978, but Gillan turned him down. Ritchie tried to get Gillan again in the band in 1980, but Gillan turned him down again. He was too happy with his own band. In 1982, their success came to an end. Gillan's band collapsed financially. He couldn't pay the wages. There was no money. Ian was on the verge of bankruptcy. His recording studio had gone. The hotel had gone. He had lost the motorcycle company, his car, his house, everything. Gillan's musicians were very angry. Bassist John McCoy hit the band's manager, Phil Banfield. According to Ian Gillan, he and his mates were on an equal share of income, but they weren't on an equal share of any cost. So he told them that he was going to rejoin Deep Purple. He went to meet with Ritchie Blackmore in Connecticut, and when he went back, his band was over. In 1983, Ian Gillan replaced Ronnie James Dio in Black Sabbath, and when Ritchie Blackmore made up his mind, Ian left Black Sabbath to join a reunited Deep Purple in April 1984. It's actually rumored that each member of Deep Purple Mark II was paid $1 million to reunite. Roger Glover dispelled the rumors, saying that they had been offered $2 million long before the reunion, between the five of them, just to do one concert. And for the reunion, he said no. They weren't paid $1 million each to do it. It was a legitimate, ordinary record deal, which was worth up in the millions somewhere, but that was between the five of them, not each. The reformed band signed a worldwide deal with Polygram, with Mercury Records releasing their albums in the US, and Polydor Records in the UK and other countries. The album Perfect Strangers was recorded in Vermont and released in October 1984. The album was commercially successful, reaching number 5 in the UK album charts and number 12 on the Billboard 200 in the US. Perfect Strangers became the second Deep Purple album to go platinum in the US, following Machine Head. And the live album Made Japan would also finally hit platinum status in the US in 1986. The same year, Machine Head increased to double platinum. Financially, the reunion tour was also a tremendous success. They played 49 concerts in the United States and 44 concerts in other countries, including one concert in the United Kingdom. In the US, the 1985 tour outgrossed every other artist except Bruce Springsteen. After that, their success began to decline. Ever since the 1984 reunion, Ritchie Blackmore established himself as more equal than the others, getting a bigger slice of the pay and making decisions to hire and fire people as it was his own band. In 1988, Blackmore decided that Gillan should be fired from the band for bad behavior. Too much drinking affected his performance. In Gillan's words, it became so difficult to work with Blackmore. There was antagonism. He wanted to do more touring, and Ritchie wanted to do less touring. And then they had a meeting, and Gillan said, "Why don't we go to South America? Why don't we go to Russia? Why don't we go all over the world? We're a live band." And the next day, Ritchie went to the management and said, "Well, it's him or me." And they chose Ritchie. And that was fine. And then they made a record with another singer. I can't remember his name, and the record label said, "Either you get Ian back in the band, or we're tearing up the contract." So I went back in Deep Purple, and Ritchie went crazy. He didn't like it. So eventually he walked out. So, in normal terms, in a family or something like that, because we are a family, you'd think it was like a divorce. He walked out, he's gone. But he wanted to keep control of the band after having walked out. And he's been a pain in the butt ever since. So Gillan rejoined Deep Purple in 1992 to record the album The Battle Rages On. The album had already been partially completed with Joe Lynn Turner. Gillan recorded his own vocal melodies and lyrics, which unsurprisingly drew criticism from Blackmore. Although Blackmore wanted Turner to remain the singer of the band, he grudgingly relented. after requesting and eventually receiving $250,000 in his bank account. Blackmore still disagreed with the decision, creating more tension between himself and the rest of the band, especially Gillan. Blackmore left Deep Purple for the second and final time in November 1993. So, after that, Joe Satriani joined Deep Purple to complete the tour, and then Steve Morse became the guitarist of the band. Deep Purple toured a lot with Morse. They didn't sell a lot of their new records. However, they made a lot of money from touring. So Ian Gillan and the rest of the band finally became multimillionaires. Gillan's estimated net worth is about $40 to $50 million. According to the website marketrealist.com, his salary is $300,000 plus, and the annual income is $4 million plus. And looks like Ritchie Blackmore's income was very modest over the past 25 to 30 years. In 2015, he demanded £750,000 in unpaid royalty and cost from the two management companies over the music he made with Deep Purple. According to the Mail on Sunday, Blackmore initiated a claim against Deep Purple overseas for £607,000, saying the firm charged too much, failed to report income received, and used an incorrect exchange rate. He was also suing HEC Enterprises, set up in 1967 by Deep Purple's original investors, for £102,000, saying it made incorrect adjustments, failed to report some publishing income, and apply charges in excess of agreed limits. In addition, he claimed £43,500 for the cost of an audit covering accounting by the two firms between 2007 and 2013. Actually, those companies had paid out to his former bandmates in Deep Purple Mark II 12 years ago, so Ritchie was a little slow on the uptake. In 2003, Ian Gillan, John Lord, Ian Pace, and Roger Glover sued the two companies without Blackmore's involvement, reaching a settlement. And in 2015, Blackmore argued that settlement should have involved him, demanding 1/5 of up to 85% of the income from 14 albums. In 2018, Ritchie Blackmore said that he would like to do maybe one more show with the rest of Deep Purple. He said, "Just do that and go, hey everybody, it's just one show for all the Deep Purple fans that like the Mark II lineup." That was my idea in the beginning. But when you're talking to managements of Purple, it gets complicated. They want their money for this and that. So it's not like you call up your old friends and say, "Hey, let's just have a good time and play. There's lots of fans that want to hear it." Once you have managements and agents and promoters getting involved, it gets so complicated that everybody just calls back and says, it's too complicated. In 2022, Ian Gillan put an end to rumors about a possible reunion with Ritchie Blackmore. This is what he said. "I think the idea of a call for a grand reunion or something like that, it would be utterly disrespectful to the living, breathing Deep Purple. It would be awful. The atmosphere would be terrible. It would be artificial. It would be only for money, nothing else. Because there's no love there, there's no affinity. 25% of the essence of Deep Purple is improvisation. And we've got a musician now that is absolutely unbelievable. And I don't know how much Ritchie has been practicing or anything like that. It's the ex-wife, and we don't want to get back together again."